Hello, and welcome back to Book vs. Movies, the podcast where I set out to answer the age-old question, is the book really always better than the movie? Today we will be talking about The Boys in the Boat, the true story of an American team's epic journey to win gold at the 1936 Olympics by Daniel James Brown, adapted for young readers by Gregory Moan, and its 2023 adaptation, The Boys in the Boat, directed by George Clooney and starring Joel Edgerton and Callum Turner. So hello everyone, and welcome back. So it's really interesting because I just released out into the world the episode, the Woman in the Window episode, and it's really, Orlando was just commenting on like, oh wow, like you just get more confident with each episode that comes out, and it's just really interesting because like my environment changes and all of a sudden I go back to not being as confident. Like I think about the 2 episodes I was able to record in the podcast studio, and hopefully we'll be able to record in there soon, but I think about that and I feel like I was just so scared of talking like me, because that microphone is so good at picking up everything that I was like, I don't want to blow my listeners' ears out. And then it's like such an easy solution, you know, I just lower the gain on the mic so that I can talk louder and everything. But anyway, yeah, it was just really interesting. And then for the previous episode from scratch, I was back to recording on my computer, and I feel like that confidence is kind of gone again. And now this is my second time recording again on my computer, and it's just like second nature. So I don't know. It was just something that was really interesting and just something I observed. And I also noticed how much I apologize. Like in the first few episodes, I think I have apologized at the start of every single one. So that's just me, and I'm working on it, but just interesting. Anyway, I am excited about today's episode. I mean, I'm excited about all my episodes, if I'm being really honest, but I'm excited about all my episodes. So today, as I said, I will be talking about The Boys in the Boat and The Boys in the Boat. That's going to be fun to say over and over. Boys in the boat, boys in the boat. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. I like to start my episodes with little anecdotes and analogies and whatever, but we did that. So let's get into it. So The Boys in the Boat, the true story of an American team's epic journey to win gold at the 1936 Olympics by Daniel Brown, was first published in 2015. At least, as I said, this was adapted for young readers by Gregory Moan. So I did read the young readers adaptation for this because that's what they had available at my library. So everything that I talk about will be in reference to this book. So kind of just like Just Mercy. I'm pretty sure most details are in, like the major important details are in the book. Maybe they were just toned back or explained to be easier to grasp for young readers, but did want to clarify that at least the young readers version was first published in 2015. But anyway, The Boys in the Boat, the true story of an American team's epic journey to win gold at the 1936 Olympics by Daniel James Brown, adapted by Gregory Moan for young readers, takes place during the Great Depression, and it follows 9 working class boys who defy all expectations and go on to win gold at the 1936 Olympics. Now, these boys are all come from working class backgrounds. Their fathers are loggers, shipyard workers, farmers. There was no reason for them to have beat the elite teams of the East Coast, the elite teams of the East Coast, who come from money and legacy and all these things that should be working in their favor. There's no reason for them to have beat them, but they did. They went on to become the Olympic team, and they went against Adolf Hitler and his German boat and ended up beating them at the Olympics. Again, these are not spoilers. This is literally in the title of the book. The focus of the main person we focus on in the book, though, is Joe Rantz. This is a teenage boy who has no family, has been living on his own since he was a teen, and he is one of the ones that gets a coveted spot on this boat. The 2023 adaptation of The Boys in the Boat is directed by George Clooney and stars Joel Edgerton and Callum Turner. This is a story set in the 1930s and tells the story of the University of Washington rowing team. And we follow them from their beginnings at the university during the Great Depression all the way to winning gold at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. So this is a biography. This is a biopic. So, I mean, there are changes obviously made, and I'm going to go into those because I was actually very annoyed by the change. I didn't mind the film necessarily. I watched the film before I read the book, and I didn't mind the film. I did find it to be a very formulaic sports movie. I feel like all sports movies have that. You watch one sports movie, you've seen them all pretty much. You just change the sport and the events surrounding them. But I'm not much of a sports person myself, but I don't mind watching sports movies. So I didn't mind this one. I wasn't like crazy about it, but I didn't hate it. And then I read the book, and then the changes that were made really, really bugged me. And we'll get into why that bugged me. But, you know, it's a faithful telling of the events, minus some things that we'll get into. So let's go again. Wow, what was that? Let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so the film does go chronologically. We start off in the future with old man Joe Rantz seeing what's more than likely his grandson rowing out in a lake, and we flash back to the 1930s. And then after that flashback, we are told the story chronologically from Joe Rantz going to school to him and the team winning at the Olympics, before flash forwarding again to the future as the grandpa's like, did I ever tell you about when I was a boy in the boat or whatever? So yes, the film is told chronologically, and we don't get too much of a glimpse of Joe's life before the University of Washington. There's some expositional elements in which this is revealed to us, but we don't actually see it. The book goes back and forth in time. So one chapter will focus on an aspect of Joe's childhood before we jump back and focus on Joe at university and the rowing team. And then we go back and gain another little nugget of Joe's very tragic childhood. It's very upsetting. And then moving forward in time. So like the book kind of takes turns in each chapter between the book's present and the past. So yes, the film focuses exclusively on Joe as a University of Washington student, while the book we do get a lot of terrible insights into his childhood, honestly. I give Joe a lot of credit after reading his like backstory. Okay, so I'm going to go off on a tangent really quick because this is something that's really been bugging me lately, which is this whole trend of giving villains a tragic backstory that kind of explains why they're evil people nowadays. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't evil people that have those tragic backstories that make them grow up to be evil people. Like, I'm not saying that, but we don't need to provide redemption for every single evil person that's ever existed, fictional or not. So all these movies that are coming out, that have been coming out for the past couple of years, giving us an insight into the evil character's backstory and letting us know this is why they turned out evil. Like, that really bugs me because we have so many more examples like Joe's where they were they had an awful, awful backstory, or they had an awful, awful childhood, very traumatic, and they didn't grow up to be evil people. And in the case of Joe, like, he still is very forgiving. We're going to get into the details of that, but he grew up to be very forgiving and loving and cared more about maintaining that relationship with his family. And I am not saying that everyone has to forgive their family members. You're more than welcome to let people that have hurt you really badly in the past and leave them behind. But what I'm just trying to say is we don't need to give a redemption arc, a redemption story to every single evil person that has ever existed, because I feel like that trend has started now to go into like real life serial killers and, you know, true crime got a little, it made like the serial killer trend really, really explode. I mean, obviously true crime has always existed, but this like true crime trend I feel has led to wanting to tell the stories of these people and giving, like, proving their humanity or showing their glimpses of humanity. And it's like, this person at the end of the day was a piece of shit. We shouldn't feel sorry for them. So anyway, I just wanted to go off on that tangent because Joe is just an example of someone who, despite his trauma, turned out to be a really like good and well-rounded person, at least how he is portrayed in the book and in the film. But so, you know, if there's anything in there that's kind of, you know, exaggerated, so whatever. And that's not the point. Moving on. Another minor detail that was kind of changed for the film, and I feel like all these changes, the film being told in chronological order and focusing on adult Joe versus his childhood, that didn't bother me. But like starting from this change onward, these changes really, really started to bug me. And I will make a comprehensive point at the end of everything explaining why these changes bug me so much. So first things first, in Joyce, in the film, they used to be classmates like in 5th grade. They liked each other, and then she moved away and now she's at the University of Washington with him, and they're reconnected and they start dating. And this is the first time they've seen each other since they were in 5th grade. Joyce is actually was his high school sweetheart. She did move away very, very, very briefly, but she came back in time for high school, and they started dating while they were in high school, and they were together from high school until university. And so, yeah, Joyce is not like this mysterious entity. Joyce is not like this person that he's reunited with. Joyce was there with him from high school up until they eventually got married and they lived the rest of their lives together. So from high school onward, they were inseparable for the rest of their lives. There is no physical stepmom in the film. She's mentioned maybe or implied. You know, the film very much focuses on Joe and his father, but Joe did have a stepmom, and that stepmom was an absolute total biatch. Do I want to go into, yeah, I guess I should talk about why she is one. So again, in the film, Joe just has his dad and his siblings from his new marriage. But in reality, Joe had an older brother who was 15 years older than him. And this older brother helped him out a lot. Not as much as he could have, admittedly, but he did help him out because there's such a big age gap. After their mom died, you know, Joe was sent to live with an aunt, and then that brother was the one that made sure to bring him back. And then the older brother gets married, and he didn't help Joe out so much after that. But Joe did have an older brother. He did have at least a little bit of help from this other person. And in the film, it's pretty much implied that he's been on his own with no help from anyone after his dad and his stepmom abandoned him, which did happen. The stepmom did not like Joe because Joe is not her biological child. And she said several times, like, you need to choose between Joe and me. And the dad would choose the stepmom. So Joe was living by himself, or like when he was little and not able to live on his own, he would he was sent to live like with other people. Eventually he was like, when his family moved to closer to the Seattle area, he went with them, but then they moved again. And at this point he was a teenager, and that's when the stepmom was like, he cannot go at all or I will leave you. So the dad left, essentially said, Joe, you're old enough to take care of yourself, so peace out, bye. And they left Joe to fend for himself as a teenage boy. And so yeah, so that's the stepmom. Eventually they move back to the area. And Joe ends up finding out by chance. He finds out where they live. He shows up, and the only one that's home is his stepmom. And he says, I just want to see my brothers and my sisters. And she says, you need to leave. I don't want you here. And she's just like this awful, awful woman that like prevents Joe from having a relationship with his siblings that he wants to have, and having a relationship with his dad, which again, he wants to have. The dad is also 100% complicit. I can't believe he would allow this. But the dad, his stepmom, ends up dying. And I remember when I was in my book club and I read that, and I still kind of feel bad saying this because you're taught not to speak ill of the dead. But honestly, I felt like good riddance because this lady was an awful, awful person. Like, she left her children when I think the oldest of her kids was like 13, and there was like this 13-year-old was in charge of like 4 or 5 other kids on top of himself. So Joe and Joyce find out that his siblings were left behind by the mom and the stepmom and the dad. And so they had to like help their siblings out in secret, because if she found out that he was visiting the kids, even though, hello, you're the one that left them behind, it would have, yeah. So very, very, very awful woman. And I hate to say it, but I also don't. Like, I was actually very glad when she died. And that might make me an awful person. But you know what? She was an more awful person, because I would not abandon my kids. So yes, the dad is 100% complicit in this. I'm definitely not, he's definitely to blame as well. I'm not going to make excuses for him. After Joe's stepmom dies, he and Joe are able to repair their relationship, and it seems like they had a good relationship for the rest of Joe's dad's life, and he was able to be a part of his siblings' lives. But it wasn't until after the stepmother died. So yeah, the dad is awful, but at least he kind of made amends. I mean, I don't think there's fully a way to make amends for abandoning your teenage son and allowing your wife to rule your life that much. But I mean, it's what Joe wanted. They fixed their relationship, so I can't say too much beyond that. But anyway, yes, in the film, like I said, Joe doesn't have an older brother. The siblings and the stepmom are mentioned, but it's really just the dad, and the dad is the one that, like, I feel like the dad was in the film, they didn't really give him a redemption arc. So I feel like that's the dad's punishment, is getting portrayed very badly in the film, because he sees Joe and he says, I mean, I don't want to have a relationship with you because my wife doesn't want me to. So bye. And they reunite for that one scene when Joe confronts his dad and says, hey, why didn't you tell me you moved back? Like, how long have you been here? And the dad says, I mean, I don't want to have a relationship with you. Bye. And yeah, so there's no, the dad is completely out of the picture in the film, which apparently did not happen in reality. But as I said, that's the dad's punishment. He gets to be seen as the deadbeat father by anyone that hasn't read the book. All right. So obviously the film has to take place at a much quicker timeline than actually happened. The film takes place over the span of 1 year, when the book takes place over a span of 3 years, which makes a little bit more sense, because, I mean, I guess it doesn't necessarily make more sense, but like this miracle team that beat the odds, by all means, like, yes, they beat the odds, but they did this in a year. And I'm not saying that's completely impossible, but it's more improbable than, them having 2 more years to kind of perfect their technique and really, really go up against these elite East Coast teams. And yeah, so in the film, since this takes place in 1 year, and Joe's it starts off with Joe starting at the University of Washington, which is where the story of the boys in the boat starts in reality. as well. They were all freshman boys that some of, not in the film, all 9 of them start at the exact same time. And in reality, some of the freshman boys made it onto the Olympic winning team and some of them did not. Like the other team members were made up of like the more like the varsity and the JV teams. So it was a mixture of like that for Olympic competition team. Like by then they all had a relationship with each other, but in the film it's very much implied that all of them started off as freshmen together and all the freshmen got to compete. And again, this is just for the sake of pacing and timing of the film that they condensed all the events into 1 year as opposed to 3. So as such, this means that it's the freshman boat competing against the JV boat. No, the freshman boat. The freshman boat competing against the JV and varsity teams to compete for a spot in the Olympics, as opposed to it actually being the sophomore team versus the JV team. So in the film, it's the sophomore and the JV teams that compete against each other to go to the East Coast to compete to become the Olympic team, while in the film, it's the freshman team versus all the upperclassmen teams. And we do get a moment in which Joe's performance is kind of up and down. Sometimes he's like this incredible rower, and other times it's like this kid is not a team player. Should we keep him on the team? Should we kick him out? I don't know, like, because his performance varies. And in the film, it starts to get kind of screwy after he runs into his dad and his dad says, I don't want a relationship with you. And that obviously gets into his head. Who wouldn't kind of have that weighing them down emotionally if they had that conversation with their father, someone that you want to have a relationship with, and he says, nope, screw you. So that's kind of like what begins to weigh Joe down and affect his performance. When in reality, it's just very much, he had a hard time trusting people. This is a kid that was constantly abandoned and left behind by the people that should have been taking care of him at all costs. So it was hard for him to trust people. And so it was hard for him to trust his teammates. And that's kind of what caused, in reality, that's what caused his fluctuating performance abilities, is just he would rather try to, even though like rowing is a team sport, he tried to do everything himself. And it was when he really allowed himself to trust his teammates that they were trying as hard as he was, they were putting the same kind of effort that he was, that he performed really well. And so he kind of, that was his obstacle that he kind of had to overcome. And at the very end, when they compete in the Olympics, obviously this was before television, so the team had to, or the spectators had to listen on the radio if they weren't actually in Berlin watching this event live. And in the film, Joyce is listening to the events with like a huge group of classmates somewhere on campus or at a bar, I think. And then his dad is listening alone. And you get this moment of like, yep, that's my boy, after it's announced that he wins, that not just Joe wins, but that the U.S. Olympic team wins. And at this point, in reality, Joe's stepmom had passed away. So Joe had started to have a relationship with his father. And Joyce was very hesitant to have this relationship, but that's what Joe wanted. So she went along with it because it's what made him happy. So in reality, Joe and his dad and all of Joe's little siblings listened to the radio together. So there was like this big family listening event. And those are like the major changes. There's like other things thrown here and there, but those are like the main ones. And so here's the big note I have to say about why the changes from book to film really bothered me. Usually when changes are made, especially with a real life event or real life people, there's a lot of things in people's like lives that are boring, and that, yes, it may have shaped who they are, but maybe it was just like, you know, an important conversation someone had with a teacher that really impacted the way they approach life. But obviously that's not going to be as interesting as like if they get bullied into learning that lesson. And it's like, you know, it's just a lot more dramatic to see them overcome a bullying, and that's what makes them the person they are, as opposed to having like this deep philosophical conversation with the teacher and that influenced who they are. Like, it's just for dramatic reasons. It makes sense to change things to make them more exciting when you're watching them happen. That being said, I feel like a lot of the things that happened in reality were dramatic enough. There was no need to change it. So for example, when in the film, as I said, it's the freshman team going up against the varsity team, and it's like this huge drama because the varsity team was like guaranteed to be going to the East Coast to fight for a spot to become the Olympic team, and it just amps the emotional stakes because like the fathers of the varsity team are threatening to like get the coach fired, to use their influence to get the coach fired, and that's not what happened. And in reality, it's dramatic enough to see these boys going against, because they're still sophomores, they're still the underdogs, and it was still like dramatic enough reading about it that I feel like there was a lot of things that just didn't need that added drama. Another thing, for example, is that, mind you, I guess this does make sense a little bit, is that in the film, it's said several times that the University of Washington team has lost against the California team, who's the UCLA team that's their biggest rival. They've lost against them in like for the past 5 years or something like that. And the freshman team is the first team to beat them. And that did not happen. They were actually like very neck and neck. Sometimes the UCLA team won, sometimes the University of Washington team won, but obviously they hadn't like lost to this team consecutively for 5 years. It was just, that was their biggest team, and sometimes they won, and that was their biggest rival, and sometimes they won and sometimes they didn't. So that one, I understand a little bit more why that change was made. Again, we're amping up the drama, but there's just like other things, like I don't see why Joyce there had to be like this big reunion between Joe and Joyce. Joyce didn't even play that big of a role in the film, she played a bigger role in the book. So yeah, the reason I really, really disliked a lot of the changes is because the actual real events were already dramatic enough, and I feel like they would have been compelling to put that on screen accurately. Like, there is no need to change everything to make the film more because ultimately what it did is it made the film more formulaic. It checked off all the boxes that it needed to check for a sports film. And I feel like it didn't need to do that. The real life events were dramatic enough the way they happened. There's also like some races that were a lot more, they were up against more adversity and reality that didn't happen. So yeah, so that was my biggest issue. I felt like a lot of the real events were dramatic enough on their own and they didn't need to be changed. And so what we ended up with was a nice, fluffy, cheesy, formulaic sports film. And I feel like that wasn't necessary. Like, it still would have been a formulaic sports film at the end of the day, but it didn't need to be as cheesy as it ended up being if we had just kept the events the way they actually happened. So I enjoyed reading the book a lot more, mainly because, as I said, the film was so formulaic. It was I did enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, especially I watched it before I read the book. So I did enjoy the film. I liked it a lot, but like I initially rated the film 4 stars, and then I read the book and I changed my rating because I just felt like the events that were described in the book were just a little bit more exciting. And yes, the book was a formulaic sports story, but there was just so much drama in there naturally that's like, we should have just kept this natural drama. It's in there. Why are we changing it? Like, this isn't something boring that happened. This is a real life obstacle that's really already dramatic on its own. We don't need to do anything more to it. So I guess we can go on and announce the winner. Can you guess what it is? The winner is the book. The book is better than the film, in my opinion. I rated the book 4 stars. And as I said, I initially rated the film 4 stars as well. But after reading the book, I feel like my opinion of it dropped to 3.5 stars. So, because I feel like 3 stars is definite. I don't feel like it was just okay. I did find myself enjoying the story, but it's just like the formulaicness, the cheesiness. It's like we don't need it. We don't need it. It's formulaic on its own. Just let it be its formulaic self. So the winner is The Boys in the Boat, the book. I will say I really enjoyed the performances of Joel Edgerton and Callum Turner. I thought their performances were great. But yeah, I don't really have anything more to add. So I'll go ahead and let you know what the next episode will be. Next episode, we will be talking about The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins and its 2023 adaptation, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, starring Rachel Zegler. If you enjoyed this episode of Books versus Movies, please leave a rating and review. That is the easiest way to help me get the word of this podcast out. If you like it, please share it with a friend as well. That'll also really help a lot. This podcast is edited by me. Everything is done by me, Yuvia, and I will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.